Good morning. Welcome to the second day of the annual Acquisition Research Symposium. We had a great first day, and I hope you enjoy the second day as well. To start off, I'd like to recognize again our sponsors for the Acquisition Research Program. We get two sponsors for the ARP, very important to us. It enables us to do our student research, our faculty research, and then put together this symposium. So ASNRDA and PEO IWS are the two sponsors for ARP. And then the sponsors for the symposium, the co-sponsors for the symposium, NWSI, as well as the NPS Foundation. Without those sponsorships, we could not put on this great event for you all. At this time, it's my pleasure to welcome the provost of the Naval Postgraduate School, Dr. Scott Gardner, for opening remarks.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. Well, that was pretty lame. Good morning. All right. Welcome to the second day. Outstanding. 20 years. This is the 20th symposium. Quick show of hands. How many people have been to 10 or more of these? Thank you for your commitment to acquisition research. That's outstanding. This event and you are crucial to expanding our understanding of military acquisition to help us deliver critical, not just rapidly, but at the speed of relevance capabilities to the hands of the warfighters. Now, NPS is organized into 9 program areas that structure our research and our teaching. Combat, and if somebody can come up with like an acronym for all these, your lunch on me. Combat systems, cyber, data and decision-making, systems management, strategic competition, battle space environments, modeling and simulation, engineering, and space. So that's 9 things. And other things are important, like medical's not in that. Agriculture's not in that. Not saying those aren't important, just not what we do at NPS. Delivering capabilities to the warfighters at the speed of relevance means we need to get acquisitions into each of those 9 areas. And we need to get each of those 9 areas into acquisitions. So how do we do that? We do that through events just like this. An event that is not just interdisciplinary, but cross-disciplinary. An event that's integrative with industry, academics, military, civilians. It's emerging tech focused. We need cutting edge ideas to deliver cutting edge capabilities. It's innovative. One of my favorite examples of what innovative means is they do these experiments where they'll say, hey, there's a hallway like this and the hallway is hot lava. Can't touch the hallway. But the quicker you get from this door to that door, the more money you get in the experiment. And they give them a stack of pizza boxes, empty pizza boxes, stack of pizza boxes. So the first person goes, takes the pizza box, puts it down, gets another pizza box, puts it down, gets another pizza box, puts it down, makes a bridge across, gets through, gets a couple bucks. Then they give someone just 1 or 2 pizza boxes. They put it down and they slide themselves across like that. Boom, 50 bucks. Sometimes less can be more if we're innovative, if we think creatively about it. An event like this that draws on practitioners, experts, professors, students, and perhaps most importantly, an event like this that includes you, those committed to improving acquisition, working together collaboratively to push the envelope to make our military better. Recent events, COVID and supply chain problems, the war in the Ukraine have really emphasized the importance of acquisition management, acquisition speed, and acquisition innovation to those unlike you who haven't been thinking about this for 20 years. We need you now more than ever. I leave you one last quote. I thought it was really kind of was nice for this. It's from General Horner. It says, be nice to your mother, but love your logisticians. Thank you very much and have a great conference.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Dave Lewis. My function today is to introduce our keynote speaker. But first, I have some sad news. Many of you know Irv Blickstein of RAND and former Navy SES, Force of Nature in both jobs. He passed away on Tuesday after apparently very short illness. So my condolences to his family and to RAND. So on to the good news. I'd like to introduce Nick Guertin, long time, well, first he's Director of Operational Test Evaluation, the important person in all our lives. But more importantly, he's a longtime friend of ARP and a many times author and contributor to our research and many times attendee at this conference. I think I saw him more here than I did anywhere else. Nick is another triple threat. My definition from yesterday, in case you missed it, he's a practitioner, he's a leader, and he's a theoretician. I got it right this time. So he connects all of that, and he asks questions like, well, the theory says this, but when I actually do it, it doesn't work. So I need to change the theory. And I do that as a leader. So all those dots are connected, and it's a pleasure to work with him. He is a strong advocate for modernization, best practices, and advanced technology. President Biden nominated him to be the next Assistant Secretary of the Navy for Research, Development, Acquisition, and he is in the confirmation process. So with that, over to you, sir. Welcome.
All right, thank you very much, David. It was a real pleasure to be here and great to see you on the stage here at the Acquisition Research Symposium again. We've actually done panel conversations here as well. As I recall, I did one conversation on maintenance-free operating period that you particularly had a particular shine to. And so it's great to be here and share this time with you. And I've seen a lot of colleagues that I've met and nurtured over the course of, well, quite a while now. Jim Green asked me to come here probably at the third one of these to be a panel discussant. I had no idea what that meant, but he promised me it would not be hard. And when I came here and saw what was happening and listened to people expounding on the things that they were doing or the things that they saw as gaps that needed to be filled, I was like, I published once, and there's some ideas I've got that I need to explore. And maybe this is a good way to do that. And the first paper I wrote got accepted, but I was funding Jim's chair, so I was pretty sure it was going to be accepted. but subsequently, I actually don't think it was a bad paper as it turns out, but the rest of them are all on merit, or at least so I hope. All right, well, I do have to note an elephant in the room, and David mentioned it, that I have been nominated by the president to be the next ASN/RD&A. I've not yet been confirmed. As such, I must limit my remarks to those things related to operational tests. Seeing nobody fleeing for the doors, I'll continue. So I've been in this job since December of 2021. And I'm sure many of you know that a lot of times where you stand depends on where you sit. And having been at DOT&E for a year and a half, I'm now an enthusiastic advocate for the work that my team does and will continue to be regardless of what job I have in the future. The Secretary of Defense and the Congress count on those independent perspectives that we provide, but also we add value to every program we touch and make sure that test programs are adequate and we find the truth about how well our system is going to work when and where they are needed. But that does put us in the business of giving bad news to good people. It's nothing personal, strictly business. But to be effective at moving the practice of operational tests into the future, we also have to learn. We have to learn from programs seeking to drive innovation. We have to learn from forums like this, and we need to figure out how do we be a part of weapons that work faster. I've made a living at being a change agent, developing knowledge on how to generate new behaviors in large organizations like the Pentagon, but always in the context of helping people improve what they do. And coming into this job was no different. Recognizing that T&E is a rapidly evolving field, or needs to be anyway. Fortunately, I've already had some good momentum in that direction that I could build from. But just to kind of review the bidding a little bit, Military capability needs to move at the speed of need. I don't think we can argue on that, but it turns out to be harder to do than say. We have our pacing challenge of China, our acute threat of Russia that helps drive some of that behavior. Also, the changing world of technology is bringing us innovation that we could provide to the warfighter to give unfair advantage. We need to be in that business. Architecting systems built to change over time is another thing that makes the operational test community scratch their heads. Where and how are the big places to engage in that? The methods and tools that we use to build systems are changing all the time as well. And the ability to do test is also changing. So that forces us to, well, if we just stay in the far right-hand side of the timeline to do operational tests, then we're witnesses to the train wreck. How do we become more effective at the work of operational tests by expanding our horizon of time during product development to understand where we're going? Shift left, look right. But our context is independent assessment of capabilities and weapons that are effective, suitable, survivable, and lethal. Those are my 4 levers. That's our core value proposition. So coming into this position, as I said, there was already momentum in that direction as the better factor of improvements already being brought by my predecessor, Bob Beeler, and pursued aggressively by my principal deputy during the just about 1-year time that he was the acting director. Ray O'Toole's fantastic partner. But I was in an OODA loop. I was new to the job. I had been familiar with operational tests, kind of a victim of it at times in the past. That's a joke. But I needed to observe and orient first, and seeing that there was already a lot of good work in that area, bringing the team together and helping them define and build on the strategy that we already had in place and updating it. We released that updated version just about a year ago in June. From that, we crafted an implementation plan. How do we know whether or not we're achieving the objectives of our strategy? How are we measuring ourselves? And we socialized that across the Pentagon, and all 3 service secretaries, plus my partners up and down the hallway in the 3rd floor of the E-Ring of the Pentagon, the undersecretaries for our research and engineering, and Bill LaPlante, who you heard from yesterday at acquisition and sustainment. All 5 of those individuals endorsed this implementation plan. So we're off and running now. We have both of those things published on the DOT&E website. I checked that this morning to make sure, and yes, indeed, they're both there under publications. And that's where I'm going to spend the bulk of my time talking to you today. Where are we going? And more importantly to you, how does that inform opportunities for research that you might want to bring to the fore, I don't know, maybe this time next year? So we all experience in our daily lives and the things we hold and carry around with us that software improvement can be developed in ways that allow rapid, incremental, and iterative delivery of new capability into the field being my pocket, except I left my phone in my room to make sure it would not distract me. So what's wrong with having that in our military systems as well, except that we don't do that? Well, we need to, but figuring out how to do that artfully is what we're all about. So the T&E community must support that feedback loop of operator input, the integration of that game-changing performance, and delivering well-informed by operationally relevant assessments. Modern software development practices introduce a big departure from the classic DoD 5000 big systems engineering V. I saw actually somebody kind of decrying 5000.02, and they showed the chart from the major capability acquisition. Well, they missed the point. There's multiple pathways. You can pick major capability if that's the right tool for the job. I'm a big fan of how the last administration recast the acquisition framework into this new set of pathways. We're taking good advantage of them in some places, but we definitely could in others. But in the places where we're doing capability that needs to be delivered quickly between discovery, innovation, invention, and delivery, that whole contractor test, development test, operational test, boundary conditions need to be merged together in a way that's a little bit uncomfortable for us. But that is the world we live in, and we need to aggressively move into it. Iterative change wrought through some of my favorite things, open architectures and incremental improvements are pervading all aspects of excellence in design. A lot of the work that I did here, working with others and driving that through initiatives like better buying power, open architecture is like a default now in our major capability acquisition. So how do we take advantage of that in the world of operational tests? So let's talk about a couple of more drivers. Artificial intelligence and machine learning. We just heard about that a little bit earlier. Both great challenges and benefits to the operational test community. How do we harness it? But how are we more domain aware of what it can do and more importantly, what it shouldn't do? Tools and processes to determine how those systems are performing because they're changing not as a part of rapid delivery, but changing in the field through use. That's different. And how do we know whether or not that those changes in performance are within the boundaries that we set for them to behave in? And when they breach out of that, how do we get it back in the box, if you will, for where it's supposed to be? We don't have the mechanisms for that yet. Areas ripe for research. Joint all domain operations. That's what we do around here, right? We've done joint all domain operations since we landed Marines in North Africa during after the Revolutionary War. But the mechanisms by which we do that are improving and changing all the time. Machine speed warfare, integration across all combat domains. It's what we have to do in order to be combat capable in the modern era. How do we do operational tests then of joint all domain capability? How do we look at mission threads and have that as the context for operational test? Especially challenging when the mechanism by which we get into operational test is through systems being developed. So, but we have to get out of looking at them in isolation, but examining how they fit into that joint all domain mission thread context. All right, those things inform the strategy. In the strategy, you'll find it constructed out of 5 pillars. The first of which is test the way we fight. Should be no surprise to anybody. The operational test people want to test the way we fight. But because that's changing, we need to change too. We need to look for how products are actually going to be used and exploring how to perform testing in that mission thread context. Operational exercises as well are a great opportunity to learn about how that joint all domain operation is going to happen, but we don't often have the opportunity or even the ability to capture data from which we can learn through analysis how those systems are behaving. That's an area that's another area that's ripe for research. Second pillar is accelerate delivery of weapons that work. Definitely a driver, and that from that driver we make it a pillar. As I said, we want to be on that fast moving train. We recognize, however, our role is to grade other people's homework. My introductory meeting with Director for Cost Assessment and Program Evaluation, the Honorable Susanna Bloom, she leveled that one on me. The two of us grade other people's homework, which is funny, but honestly, it's a part of our job. But in doing so, we need to look for those new methods and tools to help us do that earlier in the life cycle where fixing is easier and cheaper. I see the couple of colleagues here from the software engineering tool. See, I learned something from you guys. So getting capability of the warfighter faster on operational meaningful timelines, that's going to require us to look differently at development and implementation, digital tools, automation. I'll talk a little bit more about that later, to shorten the T&E timeline for the operational test piece and illuminate performance shortfalls. I don't think that means less testing, but I think it means shorter testing at the end state. We need to move back in time, and also because these are systems going to be changing over time after initial deployment, that's an area that we need to be looking out to as well. Improve survivability in a contested environment. That's what the Defense Department does. However, I need to do a quick stop to make sure that nobody thinks that I don't love the equity we have in live fire and physical survivability. It's an equity of our organization and will always be a hallmark of it. However, we're going to lean into some new areas of what it means to be in a contested environment, the non-kinetic aspects of survivability. The opening salvo will not be kinetic. We must be prepared to be cyber survivable at all times and be responsive to changing needs in that arena as well. To that end, I inherited some strong leadership positions in the area of cyber survivability and have done nothing more than to accelerate the organization's focus on that. If you read a lot of our reports, you might think, well, geez, didn't you guys test anything else? Well, yeah, we tested everything else, but we really kind of stink at this particular piece. We're building out of systems that have existed in the field for a long time that weren't necessarily architected as a primary aspect of the warfighting mission. So I'm only making it that much harder to achieve. However, you can count on this organization keeping a laser focus on all aspects of survivability, both kinetic and non-kinetic, especially cyber survivability, because unfortunately, we do have a long ways to go there. All right, pioneering of T&E for weapon systems built to change over time. That's certainly how I got into this change initiative business when I was in the program office that started using commercial technologies to build tactical relevant systems, submarine sonar particularly. So I've got a lot of time in the saddle on that, but the methods that are used to do that are changing all the time, as I mentioned. I have actually done some prior research in this forum on the notion of a testable architecture. You know, if you're not early in the timeline setting up the hooks and handles for how you're going to do operation test further downstream, you're just a witness. So we need to get out of that business and be more involved, likely more involved earlier in the timeline. It's not always cost effective to establish all aspects of the joint space physically in our test ranges. In fact, it's hardly ever cost effective to do that in today's era. To that end, we must utilize modeling and simulation for the purpose of building out the full operational test environment. However, as I'm sure at least once you've heard over the course of the past couple of days, all models are wrong at some level because they're not the actual physical representation, but many of them are useful. Especially useful if you know that they represent the actual thing in the context that they're being used for, that they've been validated and verified, and to some extent accredited by someone to say, yep, that is good enough for the purposes of this operational test. So modeling and simulation, love it, but if it hasn't been through VV&A, we're not sure whether or not we can trust it to be suitable for the purposes of reporting on operational capabilities. All right, so shift left includes getting involved in that digital thread, understanding where the data is coming from and how the models are expressing how that operational capability is going to come to fruition. I'm going to bring up an ugly topic now. Data rights. We need to get the data. If we're going to use that information, those models, and understand how they're relevant and can be trusted to represent the operational environment. However, having spent, guess what, some research published in this forum on intellectual property and data rights, we also need to be good stewards of other people's reasonably and appropriately restricted intellectual property. We need to be better stewards as the government agents to make sure that people who make private investments for the purposes of delivering excellence to the warfighter, that unique market position is preserved and not corroded by dealing with the government. We don't want to chase people away. We want them in our business, but that does mean we have to shift our ideas around a little bit, make sure we invoke our rights and get data when it's due to us, but also understand how to deal with it when it's not. Especially as we get involved earlier in the timeline where there's a lot more private innovation being applied to our warfighting problem set, better understanding that nuance of intellectual property strategy is going to have to be a part of our daily work. All right. How many have heard the moniker software is never done? Right? I mean, we live it every day. I was fortunate to be on the Defense Innovation Board Software Acquisition Practices Study and helped write that report that ended up becoming the foundation for what is now the software pathway. But we can't do oversight on everything. And we don't do oversight on everything now, but we can't do oversight on everything throughout their time horizon. So we're going to need to be picky. Still look right into the future, shift left lightly to understand where these things are going, so we have a better appreciation for how they're going to be used in the operational environment. All right, so the last pillar is about the workforce, agile and enduring T&E enterprise. The volume of systems and complexity of testing require that we revamp the processing tools to have tighter collaboration, more effective T&E planning and execution, and timelier sharing of analysis of data. It does take a long time for some of these reports to come out. So we need to be thinking about how do we use some new tools to drive that to a better place. But who's going to use those new tools? The T&E community. What do they do now? You know, Microsoft Word or Microsoft Office Suite. So we need new tools. We need to utilize those. We need to train on them. We need to become more familiar and comfortable with that. The workforce needs to move with these changing technologies. And to that extent, we've been effective at driving that into my organization and the organization around us. So we have the people involved in test and evaluation are more than the people that are uniquely coded as being in the acquisition community, right? We have people who are at the operational test commands, as well as the people who are doing work with the contractors on a daily basis. I think all of those people are testers, and we want to touch them all. All right, so we do have some high demand skill sets that we need to be able to put our hands on, though. And so we're also thinking about, especially in the area of cyber survivability, how do we look at more novel approaches for getting our hands on, training and retaining that kind of workforce, or at the very least, how do we get into a talent pipeline so that we can at least have those people when and where we need them. So that's a part of the strategy. So those are the 5 pillars. Out of that, we during about this time last year, I guess, we were sharing with Congress kind of the thoughts we had, and they went, how much do you need? And so we were able to get some additional resources in this current budget for the purpose of advancing the practice of test and evaluation. So that's so if you help us see new ideas, maybe we can find some ways to generate some resources to help advance this practice. So let's get into some of the specifics about how we're implementing that strategy. How am I doing on time, by the way? All right. So data. Data is a weapon. Today's battlefield is a sustained and as effective operations require the ability to generate, exchange, process, validate, fuse, analyze vast amounts of data at machine speeds, eventually, if not actually currently in some cases. That will require innovative T&E data management, the analysis tools to measure and evaluate these data-oriented operational performances, especially as the data elements and kill webs change over time. New infrastructure needs to be deployed across the T&E enterprise to share and analyze the data we do capture so we can provide useful information on better timelines that also inform where our problems are in our future joint warfighting operations. Well, that also means we need to be thinking about other mechanisms of collecting information, like user stories. We were in a meeting recently where the Secretary of Defense was talking about something he wanted to see come to fruition. And I talked with the CDAO afterwards, and I said, hey, that was a user story. And, so the Secretary of Defense has got user stories. Well, soldiers, sailors, airmen, Marines, and Guardians, they have user stories too. And how do we in the operational test community better understand that as a requirement for implementation? Little r requirement. These data both facilitate greater operational art, but also can be used to improve the T&E practice. And we're going to be more and more dependent on these kinds of digital thread modeling and simulation tools over the years. So speaking of digital engineering, as I mentioned, multi-domain warfighting concepts are pursuing the digital engineering-based test strategies, including test planning, execution, analysis, and programmatic decision-making for T&E. My colleagues, Doctors Sandra Hobson and Jeremy Warner will be giving a talk on that later today. Please attend if you can. It'll be riveting. The tighter timelines, ongoing coupling of military operations in the digital world, where we can test with the test community, can engage with fixes improvements that offer battlefield advantages, so that the whole digital thread will tighten up those time horizons where we can be more impactful and helpful to the warfighter at the pointy end. Modeling and simulation, I've already talked a little bit about that. It should not be lost on anyone that little instills confidence in our warfighters more than seeing the systems work in action. But as I said, we can't afford to do that at all times. In fact, don't often have access to the resources needed to pull it off. Ships aren't available, combat units aren't available. So we need to, that's another way that we need to take advantage of digital thread modeling and simulation. How do we model the user community when we don't always have access to them, but we are continuing to turn the screw on how to deliver more capability. So that's our, the drivers, the pillars, and some light touch on some elements of the implementation plan. I'm going to switch gears now to talk about how DOT&E initiatives engage in the big A of acquisition to be more agile, responsive, and effective. So again, the big A acquisition is centered around the acquisition framework of DoD Instruction 5000.02, which is pathways. And pathways facilitate tuning the acquisition to the best way to bring that to the field. And we're seeing that happening in ways that is actually, I'm pretty impressed with in some ways, and hoping for a better day at others. So major capabilities, basically the old 5000, right? Your grandfather's Buick. Although there's some notable differences that we need to talk about. Now, we've done oversight on things like helicopters and ships and missiles, all that kind of stuff, you name it. It's what we've always done. However, we need to take better advantages of new tools and methods, like I mentioned earlier, digital thread, modeling, simulation. By the way, all those major capabilities also have things in them that are built to change over time. Software, for instance. You can't drive a ship around on analog electronics anymore, as an example. So most of those software things in those major capabilities will require some kind of capability improvements over time. They'll all have to be cyber survivable throughout. They all will require some kind of technology insertion, if nothing else to avoid obsolescence, but certainly also to make sure they sustain cyber survivability. So even major capabilities need to also consider that they're part of a continuum of change. Kind of back to the digital thread and utilizing those things as a part of doing operational tests. The software pathway, as I mentioned, I'm a huge fan. I'm all about iterative change and incremental improvement. DOT&E must become more familiar with this pathway. I'd say the acquisition community at large needs to be more comfortable with that pathway. But not nearly as many programs taking advantage of that authority as I think should be. Middle tier, we've got a lot to say on middle tier. First, my office has been asked each of the past 3 years to assess whether testing is adequate for middle tier of acquisition programs. Not all of them on OT&E oversight, but we do assess their test plans as a part of this report to Congress. But through that engagement, it's facilitated us an opportunity to help those programs build adequate test approaches. And it's all tailored, it's all individualized, program by program. We're not deeply involved in all of them, but if they ask us for input on their test plans, we'll provide it. And I think that the middle tier process has been improved by that engagement. So it shows promise for expediting system development and delivery, particularly true for the rapid prototyping pathway. That's where we are kind of basically taking a calculated wager on promising capabilities. Prototypes and enable resources to be used for limited project development, and then be able to transition them initially for initial warfighter utility or support the next step in the development toward eventual transition. We've helped many programs, and I think we will see that improve over time. The rapid fielding part of middle tier, slightly more challenging, because that is about delivering more mature capabilities. We're going to field this thing at some level of scale to a broader array of warfighters in the field. And the purpose behind it, as best I understand it, is things that either already exist, something in the commercial world, or something that's used in a different part of the military, but brought to a different context, to be low risk adaptation of something that already exists, that doesn't need a whole lot of tweaking to it to make it useful in a different context. However, it's not ideal for all programs, especially those doing substantive development of new requirements. We need to ask questions like, is it ready to be used in that context? Can it be maintained? Is it good quality? Is it effective? Does it work? Is it suitable, survivable? Is it production ready enough that the test data we have can be trusted to be representative of what's actually being fielded? Big fan of rapid prototyping, slightly cautious about how we engage with, the Defense Department engage with rapid fielding. However, we need to keep a clear-eyed view of how how appropriately those authorities are being used in certain contexts. We're not all that involved in the other aspect of middle tier, the urgent capability. So I'll let that one lie follow for a minute. So we are also seeing a lot of programs, or at least sufficient number, making a shift from middle tier to major capability. They've taken the value out of prototyping, achieved that transition into warfighter ready quality, but getting it into production at scale is what's needed. I'm sure Dr. LaPlante talked about that yesterday. It's one of his favorite topics. They learned what they could out of the middle tier and then used that to transition into the right tool for the job. There is another pathway, the business systems pathway. We do have a light touch in that area, especially things like improvements to medical health care, but that also has to have some of the same benchmarks about cybersecure, suitable, flexible, be able to respond to change over time. So big fan of the new 5000. Don't show horse blankets anymore. That's your grandfather's Buick. All right. I was also asked to discuss examples about how big A acquisitions pertain to naval acquisition. This is a little bit more uncomfortable for me. I need to constrain my remarks to things related to operational testing. However, if you go to YouTube and look up if you got absolutely nothing better to do, and you have like zero quality of life, you go watch my testimony and you see where I got peppered with a few questions that related to shipbuilding. But that is not Navy policy. That's some guy waving his arms in front of a bunch of senators. However, the shipbuilding continues to be a contentious and complex topic. But one of the things that the Navy has been moving out on, and I hope to be a part of, if confirmed, is this notion of a hybrid fleet, crewed, uncrewed teaming, autonomous vessels. That is going to be very exciting. DOT&E has been involved in that to a certain extent. Think of things like MQ-8 Fire Scout as employed on the LCS and others. However, a very light touch so far. That practice of crewed, uncrewed teaming needs to be amped up. We need to figure out how to scale that to a very different level. The integration complexity is always challenging and needs to be approached with humility because integration is hard. All right, I'm wrapping up now. I hope I wasn't too fast because that would give you way too much time to ask questions, which I'm going to stay through to the bitter end, no matter how much I flail. All right. Call for research papers. So I've talked about a few places where we could use your help, specifically in DOT&E and the Defense Department writ large. We want to be a part of a changing and dynamic landscape. We want to be customers of acquisition research. And we must engage these changing practices from the position of informed research, which you can help us with, that can show our progress. We want to measure as we go. I'm a big fan of W. Edwards Deming, who famously quoted, "In God we trust, all others bring data." My flip to that is the sign above my door, nullius in verba, which is on no one's word. Bring the data. What are some of the things that you guys could think about? You guys and gals, sorry. Guys now is a neutral term, I think. Hope I'm not digging myself too deep a hole there. So what are some of the things we can do to do T&E better? I'll reflect on my experience. What worked? What's my use case? What innovations was I a part of that paid off? Slightly harder topic to write because it requires some introspection. What didn't? What did you learn from your failures? Because all failures are actually learning. And from learning, you can teach others. Think about or create an argument for or against something you're seeing that's bothering you. What should we do about it? As nothing cleanses the mind like committing your ideas to paper. I've started out at a handful. Here's my dirty little secret for the Acquisition Research Symposium. Ready for this? You have to put in an abstract. The final paper doesn't always get checked against the initial abstract to see whether or not you were true to your word. But what happens from just like any other product development, from the time you develop and define your requirements to the time you actually end up with a useful product, you might not end up with the exact thing you started out building. And that is also learning and should be encouraged. I've also found it useful, by the way, to have a co-author, kind of like a workout buddy, kind of keeps you on schedule, somebody to bounce ideas around, getting back to that humility thing, try it out for size, and your co-author, somebody you can pick who can be straight and level with you and say, what the hell are you talking about? That's not going to work. And then from that, you push and pull and you come out with something more useful. Experiences that you benefited from and describe how others can take advantage of it. Mission-based requirements. Oof, we got a long ways to go on that one. Could really use your help. Maximizing opportunity to collect operational test data during operations. That is harder to do than it sounds, by the way. Approach that one with caution, but please approach it. Test infrastructure to improve and incorporate combat problems like electromagnetic spectrum capabilities. One of the other things I inherited was a study by the national academies on our ranges. There's a classified and unclassified report. If you've got a secret clearance and want the unclassified report, ask Dr. Hobson, we'll get a copy to you. As a baseline to inform what kinds of things we need to do about our test ranges. Testing of operator performance in the face of weapon systems that are changing over time. There's a human factors thing there. I think that could be rich for opportunities. Little C story, acquisition C story. When we developed the acoustic rapid COTS insertion program, the first tech insertion was in '98. So it struck a baseline in '96. 2 years later, it's like, nobody's doing VME anymore. Let's use some servers. And they were gigantic servers. And nobody's using coaxial cable for Ethernet anymore. Let's do twisted pair. The following year, let's do ATM over SONET. That'll be cool. Ooh, that didn't work out. Yeah. And so the tech insertion thing was a very fun, exciting, fast moving train to be a part of. But all of that stuff has kind of settled down now to a great extent. Nonetheless, we were also cranking out new functional capabilities on an annual basis. And after a few years of that, the fleet said, you're giving us too much too fast. We're not using it. We can't train to it quickly enough. Slow down. Retired Vice Admiral Willie Hillardis asked that to be put on his tombstone. However, I'll tell you that I think we also need to be thinking about iterative, small, well-structured changes deployed on tighter timelines as opposed to big major capability changes in episodic cycles. Something to think about in terms of how do operators respond to changing capabilities? How do we stay abreast of other aspects of this changing environment, especially the development environment and the testing environments? Automation, how do we get better at it? How do we take advantage of things like ChatGPT? We were just talking earlier about how people are taking advantage of these large language models. without fully understanding that they're reacting to us. There's no sentience behind there. They're responding to, it's a large language model responding to inputs. Got a second for a C story. I asked it to write a little introduction for me. I was getting ready to do my Senate confirmation hearing, and it wrote something. It was beautiful. It was wrong. If you read it and you thought that was me, what else would you have to go on? So we need to be thinking about how do we take advantage of automation and its kind of nascent state and where it's useful, suitable, effective, survivable, trustworthy. Another rich opportunity. But ultimately, all of it should be focused on helping the operational test community be a part of delivering weapons that work faster at scale. Because that's another problem that we now recognize fully. We need not only to do this in the small, we need to do this in the large. So in closing, I have found this particular forum and other events like it to be helpful to improve me as an acquisition professional and as a person. I encourage you to continue to do the research that brought you here today and to help perhaps in the future the test and evaluation community through that research. And I'm ready for your questions.
Thank you, sir. And we have got some questions. And so the first question has to do with DOT independence, which we all know is vitally important. And so can you talk about the challenges of maintaining DOT&E's independence when, for example, tests are funded by programs and we're in an environment that emphasizes early iterative designs and failing early?
All right, great question. It's something that's a forefront of mind. It's something we struggle with. The OT&E community has been arm's length for decades. And so getting closer to the fight, if you will, is an emotional challenge. I don't believe it's a technical challenge. I think that our independence is in our authorities. It is not bound up in our relationships with the people doing the work.
Thank you, sir. This next question is referring to testing within the area of our rapidly expanding capabilities in space. So the U.S. Space Force, other services are leveraging commercial capabilities and trying to integrate mission kill chains and kill webs today. And this strategy will only accelerate as technology moves faster. From the transport layer to the network to the adoption of AI. How does DOT&E position itself to assess the end-to-end effects of these hybrid military commercial kill chains?
Oh, it's honestly, that is a fantastic question. And I'd love to tell you we have it completely figured out, but that's the reason it's in our strategy and our implementation plan to figure it out, because it's something that we need to work on. Fortunately, it's an area that we recognize that requires some intellectual capacity driven into the problem. Kill webs is kind of a new thing. It shouldn't be, but it's kind of a new thing. But we embrace the notion of a mission thread, and kill webs are something that happens throughout that thread. But honestly, one of the challenges we're going to face is how do we do mission threads when we're doing systems under test, right? That's going to be something that's going to be a difficult conversation to have with programs as they're coming forward and they want to do their part of test and evaluation, but their part is bigger than just what they've done. So there's a lot of conversations behind that one.
Thank you, sir. And this is a question that's coming from one of our online participants, and it refers, you mentioned big A acquisition, and this question refers to one part of that stool, that three-legged stool, the requirements process. Specifically, if you get your requirement either from JSIDs or another way, often the requirements process is perceived as slow and cumbersome. How does operational test affect the requirements process so that you can get actually requirements that are testable and measurable later when you're trying to determine effectiveness and suitability?
Context matters. The requirements process for major capability is not broken. They're big programs that take a long time to put together, something like a nuclear powered ballistic missile submarine, right? So that part of it works pretty well. Requirements, however, for things that are more tighter timelines, that are more software acquisition focused, where we're looking at user stories, not validated JSIDS requirements. The validated JSIDS requirements basically have to come down to go listen to those guys. We're not there yet. Fortunately, though, I think the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs are recognizing that there's some aspects of the JSIDS process that are have opportunities for innovation.
Thank you, sir. And this question has to deal with the war in Ukraine. And it shows the capacity involves surgibility, as was talked about yesterday, for production. How do you test or operationally test when we're doing rapid response and procurement of those kinds of capabilities for those emerging threats?
That is, as I described, one of the primary drivers for our strategy. There's two things mixed in there, though. I want to kind of parse those apart, right? So production surge, building more of things that work is one problem, kind of not really in our swim lane, but positioning us to be able to do capability improvements for things we need to make a lot of may very well be under the auspices of suitability. Is it positioned well? Is the product positioned well to take an upgrade, to be able to improve as the warfighting demand changes? Flipping that around, though, what we're learning from what's happening in Ukraine is, well, first of all, let's just take a moment for the people of Ukraine, right? What a mess. But it's teaching us a lot. And at a time we really needed to learn. We shouldn't look at it as a benefit to us, but we're learning a lot in a very positive way, and it's having an impact to a lot of what we do in the Pentagon.
Thank you, sir. And you mentioned measures of effectiveness, measures of suitability. Do you have any recommendations for a milestone decision authority when you do an operational test and the system either comes back and your evaluation says it's either operationally effective and not suitable, or operationally suitable and not effective? Do you have any recommendations for the milestone decision authority or the decision makers then on how to proceed forward in that tough situation where it's either effective or suitable?
Well, fortunately, when we write these reports, we get into the details. We say, oftentimes we say it's, either not effective or not suitable, sometimes both. But then we have a long list of recommendations in the back of every single report where we identify what we think those things ought to be different. And we'll work with any milestone decision authority that wants to reach out for us, or a program office for that matter. Actually, it's one of the things I want to stop and talk about for a minute. I talked about nothing personal, just business. That's something that Bob Beeler and I both brought to how DOT&E engages with programs. We have great partnerships. I get that, of course, I'm going to get positive feedback, unfortunately, as a part of the position, but genuinely from, that's a joke in there somewhere, right? Good. Thank you, Captain, for actually recognizing it. But we do have established great partnerships with the programs, helping them write good test plans, helping them figure out how those test plans will come to fruition, getting into the details of how we collect the data, how we analyze it, how we provide them meaningful and useful information. Our primary purpose is independent reports to the Secretary and to Congress, but we're useful to programs because we provide an independent assessment of adequacy of tests, and then an independent assessment of how the tests came out. Finding problems is a good thing, and identifying how to make their programs better is useful learning. All right. So are there any in the room, or we're all looking at
Selecting here.
All right.
Yes, sir. So, sir, you said you're not going to speak as ASMDA, and we respect that. But can you talk a moment about the operational tests for ships where you have to make a lethality and survivability determination, but you can't destroy the asset because that ship will be fielded.
So I have a team of guys that are focused on operational test of ships, including the live fire shock trial. We've been working with the R&D teams at NAVC, at Carter Rock, and others for how could we possibly use modeling and simulation to reduce physical shock testing as an example. There's other aspects to live fire when it comes to ship, but certainly that's the big one, and it's cool to watch. However, because ships are large, complex, physically integrated structures, all of the science behind modeling that large dynamic system and what the context of how that shock trial will be impacted by the systems aboard it, we're not all there yet. Now, we test individual pieces. Certainly, I've been a part of that, doing 901 mil-spec 901 testing for components that made up, say, submarine combat systems. But honestly, we haven't figured out how to get out of just whacking it. Now, you'll watch these pictures. It's just a gigantic explosion, like 10,000 pounds of explosive, but at a specified distance, because what you're doing is basically taking a giant hammer and whacking the whole ship all at once, and you ring the whole thing. But we've been doing this for years, and sometimes we break things a little bit. We just did the shock trial for the Ford a couple of years ago. And there, I mean, can't talk about the details of the report, but yeah, we found some stuff. And it's not things, unfortunately, it's not anything that we would have found a different way, and we didn't break the ship. As it turns out, the test plan for the Constellation, I'm going to whack that one too, because the modeling and simulation just isn't there yet.
Thank you, sir. We have two questions that have to do with kind of the area of open architecture. How do you do operational testing in an open architecture environment, and what's the division of responsibility for the testers versus the developers for the warfighting community?
I will direct that question to my prior works with Captain Gordon Hunt, published right here about 5 years ago, I want to say. So the idea of a testable architecture, setting up what it is you're going to build, doing the digital thread pieces, figuring out how you're going to show open. My friends back at the Software Engineering Institute hopefully will come up with a paper on how to test open architecture someday soon. I left you a draft 4 years ago. Aren't you done yet? Actually, it was 2 years ago, now that I think about it. I had fun doing that. Nothing personal, just business. Anyway, I've actually wrote a little bit about that, but at the core of it, what do we want to achieve with an open architecture? We want to basically future-proof our systems. We want to open up opportunities for innovation from a variety of different suppliers. So there's ways of showing things like that without getting into some deep structural analysis of SysML diagrams. You can just do that through practical experiments. I handed you a thing on Tuesday, it's Friday. Are you done yet? What's the integration environment? How well is it established? How do you take advantage of automated testing to bring in those different things? I think we can do practical test and evaluation of what the objectives of open architecture without breaking the bank on research.
Thank you, sir. And if you have any closing remarks, you have a couple minutes left.
All right. I'm very excited to be here. I hope you'll be invited again next year. I've genuinely enjoyed reconnecting with my colleagues. I hope to, I'm going to stick around the rest of the day. And I'm looking forward to learning more from the other panel discussions. It's a thrill to me to be a part of a community that's working on change. And that's what you people do here. And I hope to be a part of this experiment in improving the practice of defense acquisition for years to come.
Thank you very much, sir.